Today we are taking a look at the ZTE Whirl. This is an all-new entry-level device from Straight Talk. This one retails for $79.99, and it is a GSM phone, so Straight Talk would activate this one with either AT&T or T-Mobile. It does still need the $45 unlimited card when used with Straight Talk, of course. Now the highlights on this one are a 1 gig processor. It comes with Android 4.1.1, which is Jelly Bean. As you can see there, Android version 4.1.1. The screen size on this one is 3.5 inches. It comes with a 3 megapixel camera. It does not have an LED flash though. Now, if you've looked on the Straight Talk website, you might have noticed a similar phone to this. If you look at the specs on their website, everything looks the same. The other phone is the ZTE Valet. This is essentially the same phone, except, as I mentioned, this one is GSM, whereas the Valet is CDMA. Now there are a few other slight differences between the two phones, but the major one being the fact that this one is GSM and the other one's CDMA. One other difference that I'll note is that the Valet actually has an LED flash on the camera. This one does not, and I think the Valet is a little bit better looking phone than this one. It's got a different trim going around it. As you can see, this one is fairly straightforward, fairly plain. This trim going around the screen is flat black. That's textured. Then you have that shiny black trim going around the phone. And the back is hard plastic. It's not rubberized. So it's just a regular plastic cover. Now the size, as I mentioned on this one, the screen is 3.5 inches, so this is a pretty compact phone. As you can see there with the playing card, it's about an inch and a half taller than the playing card and a little bit narrower. Now the measurements on this one are about 4.5 in height, as you can see. About 2.5 in width, and the thickness is about half an inch or so. And as I mentioned, the screen is of the 3.5 inch variety. Maybe a little bit less, but not much. Now, again, the layout on this one is pretty straightforward. As you can see, you have the capacitive touch buttons just below the screen. And the buttons are backlit, and they do have a light sensor. So, as you can see, I'm covering the sensor. They light up. So, in theory, these buttons would only light up in the dark. Now on the bottom you have your charge port. On the left you have the volume. You have your 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, so that's just your regular iPod type jack. Here's your lock/power button. This phone doesn't have a dedicated camera button, so there's nothing on the right hand side, as you can see. Now again, there's your camera, pretty basic, no LED flash. And removing the battery, I'll show you that the phone does come with a 4 gig SD card. One of the things I don't like about this one is that you have to remove the battery in order to get to the SD card. And then another thing is that it's got this little locking mechanism that locks the the SD card in place, which you have to slide up and then pull up in order to remove or change a card. But as you can see, this one comes with a 4 gig card already installed for you. Okay, so before we go on and show you some of the Android stuff, let me go ahead and weigh it for you. I forgot to do that when I measured it. This one weighs about 4.5 ounces or so. Actually, a little bit less than that. 4.25 ounces is what this one weighs. Okay, so now for the Android stuff, as I said, this one comes with Android 4.1.1, so it's a fairly new Android version. It's not the latest, but it's fairly close to being one of the later versions. It's got 5 home screens. One slight difference between this and the Valet is the fact that the screens are numbered at the bottom. So as you can see, the little numbers change at the bottom for depending on which home screen you're on, and it's got 5 of them. I don't think the Valet has that. Not a big deal, but that is a slight difference between them. Now this one comes with all the standard Google stuff. Of course, you got Gmail, you got your Play Store. You will need a Google account for that. So you'll need to create a Google account if you don't have one already. And if you want to do, or if you want to get paid apps, you will need to provide Google with your credit card. Now the Play Store is totally independent of Straight Talk, so Straight Talk does not restrict that in any way. You're free to download whatever apps you want. Now this phone, the performance on this one is good, so it'll handle pretty much most apps that you can download. Streaming does streaming just fine, so it'll do Netflix fine. Now do keep in mind that despite this being quote-unquote unlimited, that Straight Talk does throttle your data usage when you approach probably 2 gigs, which is typical, maybe a little bit less. Of course, YouTube, which works great on this phone. The one downside of a small screen like on this phone is that the resolution isn't quite as good as it is on some of the larger phones. So if you actually probably can't tell in the video, but if you were to look at the resolution compared to a larger phone, you'll find that this phone is a little bit grainier than some of the larger phones. Now this brings me to another drawback on these ZTEs, and it's not just this one, it's all the other ZTEs, all the newer ZTEs, and that's the fact that the sound quality on this one isn't the best when it's on speaker. The speaker is somewhat weak. As you can see, it's pretty tiny, so it doesn't have the best sound quality. So if you want to watch videos, you'll either need it really quiet, or you'll need to use a headphone jack for this phone. Now the other Google stuff, as I said, you got navigation. Of course, it does have GPS capabilities. You got Google Maps. Both work great on this phone. And that's about it as far as the noteworthy apps. Of course, you have all the other standard Google stuff that comes on all these Android phones, but there aren't any extras like FM radio or anything like that on this phone. Now, as far as the keyboard goes and that kind of thing, when you're texting, the keyboard is fairly standard size. On this, it's pretty responsive and it's pretty accurate. Of course, I'm doing this one-handed, but it responds real good, and it's pretty accurate as far as where you touch and what it selects, which is good. But of course, to keep in mind that again, this is a small screen device, so the keys or the actual you know, letter icons or whatever you want to call them are a little bit small. And of course, you can always turn it sideways and they get a little bit bigger. And then finally, we'll show you the phone interface, which is pretty standard on these. Again, pretty accurate when you're dialing. And this interface is pretty standard in all the ZTE phones that you'll find on Straight Talk. So I think that about wraps it up for this phone. This is a good phone for the price. For the price, all things being equal, if you have the same coverage, if say for example AT&T is just as good as Verizon in your area, then I would definitely go with a Valet, simply because it's a better looking phone in my opinion. And you do get the LED flash, which comes in handy when you use the phone as a flashlight at night, by the way. This one doesn't have that. But everything else is about the same as it is on the Valet. So if you have much better AT&T coverage and you need an entry-level phone like this, again, this one's only $79.99, then the ZTE Whirl is worth the money. No real complaints other than what I mentioned as far as the resolution not being as good and the sound quality.